Okay, so let's go back because the reason these large language models are also effective is because of the scale of the text
Yes.
that has been scraped. Can you talk about just the scraping of the text from the web, and is it necessarily representative of the world
Right.
based on just because of the scale?
Yeah. Yeah. That's like exactly the right question to be asking. Because in our transition from language models to large language models, we went from using curated data that was collected with licensing. So it was often newswire text, right? So Wall Street Journal was a massive powerer of earlier language models. And that was with agreements, with the Wall Street Journal that we could use this text. So it went from that kind of paradigm where you specifically decide what data inputs are appropriate, and then you get appropriate licensing for it, to sort of the recognition that with Web 2.0, the growth of blogs and social media and all this kinds of stuff, you could get tons and tons of text, and there wasn't really laws around protecting that text. So, the time was ripe to really get as much as you can. And what we ended up seeing, going into 2019, was that once you stopped curating altogether, once you just said whatever I can get from the internet, as opposed to just focusing on like high quality resources like Wikipedia, if you get whatever, then the systems were even more fluent. And so that created a situation where, we were just all getting as much data as we possibly could, regardless of any other considerations. Because it was, downstream improving the performance of the systems on benchmarks and the perceived fluency. Um, and so the data that was being scraped was what was available to get on the internet. And the internet, is skewed to represent the viewpoints of people who are on the internet the most. And we know some statistics about that from some of the really common websites. So Wikipedia has traditionally been populated by North American men between the ages of 17 to 35, higher education, no kids. And so for a while, if you looked up Black history, it went to African American history. And like side note to non-American, or side note to Americans, not all Black people are African Americans, right? But if you're a white dude, right, in North America, like you make that connection, and there's not enough people to be around to sort of correct it otherwise. So those kinds of biases and skews are throughout the internet because of who tends to be most online and writing most online. And, large sources like Reddit additionally have a lot of the sort of misogynistic viewpoints that, people in these sort of populations tend to share online. And so that means that disproportionately what's represented in this data that these systems are learning from are the viewpoints of, like white men in their 20s who, might not have a girlfriend, or they might not, I'm being like a little bit like, I'm being a little bit like flippant, but I guess I'm trying to get at the fact that like women's viewpoints are generally not well represented. And the viewpoints of people who are non-white are generally not well represented.
So from that perspective, it actually hasn't changed that much from, let's say, a Google search, because Google has typically ranked Wikipedia high, Reddit high, a lot of it because of their own algorithms, and those are already representative of the hegemony that you're talking about.